Bonjour, good day, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back. Sawubona for those of you in South Africa. Hello, how are things today? This is Chris once again with Indaba Africa, coming to you live from central Pennsylvania. Today we have a special guest. We're going to get to him in just a few moments, but I want to welcome everybody back. And first, I'd like to make a few comments about yesterday's live stream. Well, for those who were able to tune in yesterday to our live stream, it was quite an exciting day, at least from my perspective, and I believe those who watched the stream enjoyed it. For those unaware of what happened, yesterday here on Indaba Africa, we had a live stream lockdown concert from Giselle, an up-and-coming Afrikaans singer who also sings in English, from Namibia, who currently lives in South Africa. She did the debut of her new album here on Chris White Africa, the Indaba Africa channel. It's a 1-hour concert. If you missed it, I encourage you to take a look at my videos, go to latest live streams, and also it's a premiere video. I'm highlighting it on my channel for now. It was quite an amazing concert. Put it on your mobile, put it on your tablet, watch it on your Roku, put it on your PC, your laptop. Just play in the background and listen to it. The music's not to everyone's taste, some of it, but I will tell you that if you stick with it, you'll find some truly stirring and encouraging songs on there. It was quite pleasant. Really enjoyed it. My many thanks to Johan Eisel, the manager for Giselle, and Giselle for a fantastic performance, excellent production value, how they mixed the videos from her previous music. And they also added in the live feed plus the green screen background. And it was a green screen behind her, folks. She was there live. It's fantastic, really amazing. A lot of people from South Africa who speak Afrikaans remarked about, is she from Namibia? And I guess I had made that clear in the promos. But yes, she's from Namibia. The reason they mentioned that is they could notice her accent wasn't from the Western Cape or from the High Veld, but rather a Namibian accent or a Northern Cape, which is somewhat different. And to those who noticed that, kudos to you. So Henk Kroppa, welcome aboard there. Good to see you. Thank you for joining us. So yeah, so it was quite an event. I hope that you get a chance to go back, share it with your friends, share it with your family, share it with your enemies, your foes, friends, family, and foes. It's something for everyone. And even if you don't listen to Afrikaans, she has an amazing voice and quite a good performer. She's really got her act going together. And oh, by the way, a little piece of trivia about Giselle. It turns out that, you know, those 6 degrees of separation with Kevin Bacon, that's something I hear became a thing in America about 20 years ago, basically claiming that you know someone who knows someone who knows someone, and within 6 degrees, you'll find Kevin Bacon. It's really funny. But anyway, so I guess at this stage, I'm 3 degrees of separation from Adam Levine of Maroon 5. What? Yeah, Adam Levine. There's the Ranger. Welcome aboard. Adam Levine of Maroon 5. Well, let me explain. Okay, so Giselle grew up in Grootfontein, which is in the northern part of Namibia. When it was Southwest Africa, before it was Namibia and the South Africans administered, that was the major military base in the northern third of the country from which the South African Defense Force ran its operations. And so Grootfontein had a large Afrikaans-speaking population, and still does to this day. But she grew up in Grootfontein in the north, and her school chum, her pal, was Beate Prinsloo. Now, who is Beate Prinsloo? Well, if you watch Victoria's Secret, you may know who that is. She's a Victoria's Secret runway model, and she's done that for well over a decade. She also happens to be the wife of Adam Levine, the lead singer of Maroon 5. So, Giselle, Beate Prinsloo, Adam Levine. 3 degrees of separation. Didn't even take me 6 degrees to get there. So, no, I don't know Adam Levine. I don't know Maroon 5, although I have gone to one of their concerts. Anyway, so there you go. So folks, welcome aboard. We've got an audience building right now. So what I want to do is, before I introduce our speaker, he's waiting patiently on here. We're having a little challenge. He is in Nigeria, and bandwidth can be a challenge at problems, even though he's in the capital, Abuja. So he's on here audio. We'll bring him on shortly. But before I introduce him, I got to do a quick rant here. Okay. All right. Is anyone else irritated with Microsoft? Yeah, I've spent 35 years being irritated with Microsoft. And yes, I'm just as irritated with Apple. So don't tell me Apple. That's not going to buy it. So always Microsoft seems to try to subvert your expectations. I rebooted my laptop and it came on and I couldn't do anything because it told me that my OneDrive storage was full. Now, why is that? Because you used to buy software for Microsoft Office from Microsoft and you had the software. You just had a license, you could use it. And when a new version came out, they tried to encourage people to buy new versions. Well, now you must have an annual subscription to this garbage software in order to use Microsoft Office. So my subscription expired. I haven't put the new key in that I purchased. It's like buying insurance. And so now it wouldn't let me do anything because it said my drive was full because I'm not authorized to. I didn't even load anything in OneDrive. It automatically defaults and takes your documents, your PowerPoint presentations, Excel spreadsheets, and loads it up to the cloud. I don't want my things on the cloud. Stop it, Microsoft. But that wasn't the real issue. The real rant here is Skype. So our guest is calling in on Skype today, and I went to open Skype, and it says, allow it to make changes to your operating system. Skype downloaded new software without my permission, without my knowledge, and was trying to install. Now, why does that matter? Because experience has shown me that in the past, whenever Skype updates, you have to put your password in, and I have no idea what my Skype password is. It's somewhere. I'd have to go find it. So all that in the midst of prepping for this. All right, ladies and gentlemen, you've been patient. Thank you for tuning in. We're going to get right to it now. Today, we're going to talk about security and geopolitics and national security strategy and things like that, national security issues in Nigeria and the Lake Chad Basin and perhaps even wider West Africa or Africa in general, but certainly focused on Nigeria. We have an outstanding guest with us today who has a lot of experience in this, and I'm going to introduce him just here in a second. So his name is Ovigwe Eguegu. He's a Nigerian analyst and a writer specializing in security, geopolitics, and development in Africa, and his work focuses on providing analysis and insight into geopolitical, systemic, and practical dimensions of the issues, events, and actors shaping regional security across Africa. So he researches and analyzes Africa's security architecture, interstate, multilateral security cooperation, peace operations, while also paying close attention to the Africa policy of global actors like the United States, China, Russia, and the European Union, particularly in the area of security and development. I imagine at some point he's probably going to take a close look at Turkey, who's been much more active in African security issues, particularly in the Horn of Africa, Somalia, and elsewhere. But Ovigwe is a contributor to the China-Africa Project. Those who don't know it, that's a excellent podcast that's done by an American journalist who's based in China, and he has a teammate, Cobus von Staden, who is based in South Africa, and they do excellent research analysis and fantastic audio production on a podcast about, hey, Paulie Fire, welcome aboard, about China and Africa, but also other actors. So full disclosure, I was a guest on the program last year while I was still serving on active duty. I came on and talked about China-Africa policy and the U.S., and so I was a guest on there. But Ovigwe is a contributor to the China-Africa Project, which is fantastic. They got some great written products. Ventures Africa and the Africa Report from Jeune Afrique, which is a fantastic publication. When it first came about around 20 years ago, it seemed like its focus was almost entirely on the Maghreb. Understandable since its founder was based in Tunisia. But the Africa Report has become a top-notch product for news across the continent in the ensuing years. So I can highly recommend the Africa Report. You can find it online, or you can buy it at newsstands if you can ever get out of lockdown. So Ovigwe has also appeared on Al Jazeera in English, Deutsche Welle News, DW News, and Arise News on several occasions to discuss conflict, security, Africa-China relations. So today, before I get him on here in just a moment, we're going to talk about issues like Boko Haram, the Niger Delta, oil bunkering potentially, also talk about issues that a lot of people don't think about, like medical diplomacy and other things that come into play when it comes to security, because both Ovigwe and I look at security from a holistic standpoint. So we look at security as not simply counterterrorism or military forces or law enforcement, but also we're talking about food security, medical security, security for our network, cybersecurity, things like that. All of that plays a role in security. It's a holistic if you look at things from a geostrategic standpoint. And really, honestly, I think it's the only way you can look at security if you want to be effective. So we're going to talk about those things, but also you might be surprised if we have time in the discussion, we're going to bring up things like remittances and the importance of that to Africa, particularly in the midst of the Wuhan coronavirus COVID-19 lockdown. So with that, I don't want to hesitate anymore. I'd like to welcome our guest and make sure we can hear him on here. Ovigwe, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thanks for having me on the show.
Oh, it's my distinct pleasure. It's very exciting. You know, we've been in touch on LinkedIn for a bit, and you'd asked about coming on the program, and I wanted to make sure I had more than 2 people listening. So we had to wait a little bit to build an audience, and we've got an audience now. And what's interesting is a lot of people can't always tune in when the broadcast takes place, but we wind up getting as much or more listeners after the fact. So hopefully we'll get even more people after this broadcast. But welcome aboard, Ovigwe.
Awesome. Nice to be here.
Okay, so let's talk about this. So let me a little bit about you personally. What drove your interest in the topics of geopolitics and security? Where did that come from?
Yeah, I think it was when I was growing up. You know, I grew up in Delta State. That's as south as it gets, because in the Niger Delta region, we're at the center of the Niger Delta region. So growing up, you know, my experience was pretty much, you know, oil bunkering, militancy at its early stage then was really much confined to creeks. It wasn't really coming out. It was basically that kind of environment, you know, that I grew up in. Also trying to, you know, there was this question in my mind: why why is this commodity so important? So I know it powers, economies of the world, but there's so much talk about oil, so much. So I started, even though I was a science student, I really took interest in, oil as a commodity, and from that just sprang my interest in geopolitics because oil no longer became a commodity, that it's just in my backyard, but something that is really global, really influences policy and the way people think about their economies. Yeah.
So if I understand you correctly, growing up in the Niger Delta, of course, oil is everything there, one way or another. It affects everyone's life. So you saw oil and people were talking about it as a commodity, but you saw it as something more. And eventually that got you thinking from a geopolitical standpoint. And that's how you really got into the sector. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's excellent. Yeah, it's interesting because when I talk about security from a holistic standpoint, I have a background in energy as well, and it's a consequence of realizing the importance of oil. When I was a second lieutenant, I was sitting in the Gulf War in a foxhole with rain pouring down on me in the desert and the sand collapsing around me, going, "What am I doing here?" and after. And of course, one side of the political aisle in the first Gulf War kept going on about it's all about oil, it's all about oil. And I listened to that, and I was a young man, a university graduate, and a commissioned officer. And I said, okay, no, it's not about oil. This is about other things. Well, okay. You know what? I came to the realization at some point at that stage in my life, sitting in that foxhole, having water pour on top of me. And I said to myself, you know what? Maybe it is about oil. And if it's about oil, you know what? Until somebody invents cold fusion or we come up with an alternative source of energy that is reliable, efficient, inexpensive, and ubiquitous so that everybody can use energy, sadly, the world relies on the access to energy and energy primarily in the form of petroleum. So the world's economy and people's development depends on it. So if it's about oil and the oil supply for the world being threatened, Europe, Japan, Africa, Asia's economy being threatened by oil being cut off by Saddam Hussein, then you know what? I don't have that big a problem with it. And people are like, you're a heretic. Yeah. No, I'm not a heretic. I'm just making a rational decision. Anyway, so I see we come at it from the same sort of perspective. So let's talk about some of the security issues in Nigeria specifically. Which one would you like to talk about right off the top of the bat?
Yeah, right now I know it's all about health security, COVID-19 and so on and so forth, and how it's impacting, economies. But at the background, you will still have, terrorism still be a major issue because Boko Haram is still alive and well, despite efforts over the years to squash Boko Haram. And then there's food security issue being threatened. This is a very huge country. We have about 200 million people, of which 90 million Nigerians have to earn every day, for them to just to eat, and that tells you how important going out to work really is. So with the lockdown, it's been really hard. People complaining left, right, and center about how they can't eat and so on and so forth. So there are so many issues. The Niger Delta issue is toned down a bit because of the amnesty program that took place from about 10 years ago, thereabouts. But the country as a whole, I think, while Boko Haram has dominated security for better part of 10 years, but the broader human security issue, whether it's food, it's health, there's so many dimensions to look at. So pastoralism and how that causes conflict in Middle Belt, that's still there. Although again cold, but it just could flare up anytime. That's how vulnerable and fragile the country can be. Yeah.
Well, you brought several issues up there, so let's focus on one of those. And this is one that I find particularly interesting. Some of my colleagues and my former students who are now general officers in the Nigerian Army and others in the Navy as well, who attended the War College, we talk about this frequently over the past few years. And this is a conflict that many people outside of Nigeria or the Sahel are completely unaware of. But it turns out that this became the most serious conflict, even more dangerous and more time-consuming for the Nigerian military than Boko Haram in recent history. And I'm talking specifically about the conflict between herders and pastoralists. For our audience, let me explain just briefly, and I'll let you give us a backdrop, and then I'll let you talk about it. So what's going on here is that land tenure remains an issue in much of the world, especially in parts of Africa. And people were given permission to graze their cattle on land, provided they followed certain rules and obeyed them. This wasn't always followed, what with population growth and expansion of the Sahel, moving further south and limiting water resources and degrading the soil. The herders, who also played a role in degrading the soil, had to move further afield and interfere in people's crops, and this led to armed conflict. So I think that's kind of a good setup for it. So Evikwe, can you talk a little bit more about this important issue?
Yeah, so I mean that's a very good explanation because you just mentioned the issues that have been driving the conflict. Of course, there is inter-ethnic distrust, and that has always been an issue in the country that's as diverse as Nigeria. But the climate impact or the impact of climate change, on agriculture, it's really telling. So you have the herders complaining about grass is not being green enough in the usual cattle corridors, because in Nigeria what they did I think in the 70s or thereabouts, they created cattle corridors from the north to the southern part of the country where these herders can take their flock towards the south during the dry season, because it can get very arid in the north, and then they can graze at the same time. Too, they just distribute the mature ones to the markets just as they go down to be slaughtered, go down south. So, but what we've seen in the last, maybe the conflict has been going on, but it really intensified in about the last 5 years, because they started going way out of the corridors, like horizontally out of the corridor, into farms, into where people are storing their crops and things like that, and then the cattle started eating this crop. So what you have is responses from local communities to say, oh no, you can't do this, you can't do that, you guys have to stay on your lane. And then the header saying we can't stay on our lane because there's barely nothing for the cattle to eat. So the conflict, the killing, and when you look at one of the problems with Nigeria is communication is also very, very key here, because now most of the Fulani herdsmen, they speak Hausa, right? And across the corridors, you have a multitude of languages being spoken. So even if not all of them are violent. One of the factors driving violence also it's not just the fact that we're having changes in our environment, like from geographic standpoint, but also the lack of communication. So we'll have several cases where the header attacks the farmer just because they couldn't communicate or hear what both parties were saying. So one of the steps the government has taken since then was to really try to build like a dialogue between farmers and herders. So they set up this group and then liaison or intermediary offices where they try to hear what's being said on both sides, to bridge that communication gap. That has helped, and the main policy or the main thing the government has done that has really contributed to keeping the violence down and the attacks down has been like a huge donation. I think about R1 billion or so was given to, we call them Mieti Allah. Mieti Allah is like the parent organization of the cattle herders in the country. So the government gave them that much money. Pretty much it was interpreted along politics, because they were treating it got so bad, like you said, that people were complaining and asking for amnesty, like an amnesty package, just like they did in Niger Delta, right? So people always feel if the government could do an amnesty program for the Niger Delta region to save the economy from collapse, then of course it can do the same thing for human security and human life too. But we could go into the politics of that. But basically, the government ended up giving lots of money to cattle herders, and I don't see. And then there was another issue of ranches. So what the government also done again is to ask state government to create like we call it Ruga. It's like a settlement where you can have, instead of having pastoral farming just moving up and down, just have them in one spot, and then you can set up like you have in the US, like huge cattle ranches, or in Europe and other developed parts of the world. So that's really what those two, those are two big steps taken, and state government can access federal government funding, create these ranches, and then these farmers can keep their cattle, within a set location instead of moving crisscrossing the country and then having that conflict with local community. So these are the steps that have been taken, and so far so good. Yes, we've seen like a huge reduction, in clashes, but at the same time, these cattle rearers are still moving across the country, but in much lower amount and lower number. So yeah, that's really the situation right now.
So there's been improvement, but we've got a question here, and I want to welcome some regular viewers on here in just a moment. But just to recap a little bit there. So if I understand, one of the challenges here is that a lot of the herders tend to be Fulani, who are Hausa speakers, and the pastoralists often speak different languages. And one of the contributing factors here, approximate cause of conflict, has been they approach each other. They can't even speak a common language, and it leads to escalation and armed conflict. That's one of the challenges early on, correct?
Yeah, correct.
Okay, so we'll get to the question here in a moment, but I just want to welcome aboard some folks. We got my ranger buddy comes on here. Hank Kloper's here. Paulie, there's other folks here, but these are just ones commenting. Paulie's here. Bo Berger, welcome aboard. Hank Kloper's got a question, and then Ice, welcome. You got here a bit late, but you made it. I'm guessing you were probably listening to Ronaldo e-begging before you came here. Well, Ronaldo hosts is a South African YouTuber who has a brilliant program, and we joke him about e-begging. But anyway, he actually does it, though. So Hank says, does the USA have any army presence in Nigeria? I'll answer that, and then we'll get Vigwe in here. So the U.S., through U.S. Africa Command, has worked with the Nigerian Armed Forces. And we had a multinational intelligence cooperation center that was in Abuja, in which we sent some personnel down to work with the Nigerians to help them with intelligence for the Boko Haram issue specifically. And then periodically, and often, as in many parts of Africa, we have special forces soldiers who go on short-term trips for joint training or for familiarization and cooperation with partners, including Nigeria. They deploy to different parts of the country. So as far as a presence, that's always a tricky word to use. We don't have a base there. We don't have troops there on a permanent basis. The only people who are in uniform who live in Nigeria on a regular basis would be the military personnel assigned to the Embassy, the Defense Attaché, the Security Cooperation Office, the Marine Security Guard Detachment, which doesn't work for the Defense Department, but actually works for the Department of State, the Marine Security Guards. So, Ovigwe, what have you got to say about the presence of U.S. forces in Nigeria?
Yeah, I think it's pretty much actually the way you painted it. So most of the time you hear on the news about defense cooperation. Yeah, that of course that implies somebody coming from the other side also. So one thing that people fail to understand is having a base is not really a problem, So they don't have a base in Nigeria, but the cooperation is very strong, and we've seen how important it is, especially in counterterrorism operation in the Sahel region. I mean, when word came out that the State Department, the DOD was going to pull out troops, you could see this roaring, concern from Africa, saying we shouldn't do that because African governments are not prepared. The regional security forces are still not, well equipped and adept at addressing the threats. So yes, as it is now, there's no base in the country, that US base in the country, but of course there's cooperation between both sides, in the area of counterterrorism that you can see almost on a daily basis. At least where I work, there's hardly any week you don't see US soldiers just coming into the hotel. But yeah, of course, it's usually for cooperation, not necessarily a base.
Right, and there are also soldiers that show up on a short term, typically a week, 2 weeks at most, sometimes longer, but usually they're a very short period of time. They rotate out, and then later someone else comes. So they're not based there. It's not where their home is. They're coming from somewhere else. So I should mention, since that topic came up, but not specifically about Nigeria, but since Ovigwe brought the issue up, when the Secretary Esper announced that the Africa Command would reduce its presence in Africa, people lost their minds. Of course, some of these same people were the ones that just 5-10 years ago were complaining and whining vociferously about the militarization of foreign policy and the U.S. creating Africa Command to abrogate the sovereignty of African states, all of which is absolute nonsense. And I can say that from having been inside the wire and served there from the very beginning with Africa Command and across the continent with it. But the real issue here is that when they talk about reducing troops, there was just another article was published by the Mail and Guardian by Nick Terse, who's an author, a journalist who writes about security in Africa, and it perpetuated this myth about this military presence in Africa. The U.S. has over 6,000 soldiers in Africa. Yes and
That's
no.
not true.
Right. We have over 4,000 in Djibouti at Camp Lemonnier, but that's not because of Africa Command. That was created after 9/11 by Bush working with the Djiboutians who leased the base so they could deal with terrorism in the Horn of Africa. That's been there since 2002, 2003, and it was before Africa Command. So it has little to do with that. They just assumed responsibility for it when they got control or responsibility for Africa. So that's over 4,000 of the 6,000. Then the next big number is 800 at the drone base in Agadez in Niger. Yes, there are about 800 U.S. military personnel there, but they're not special forces or infantry or rangers. They're Air Force personnel, and a larger percentage of them are security forces and logisticians than anyone who does anything. It's not like there's F-15 pilots sitting there flying planes around. They fly drones for intelligence purposes to support the Nigerian effort against in the Sahel, against AQIM and others and Boko Haram. So that 800 is not 800 combat troops. So you take the 4,200 or 4,300 that are in Djibouti, you take the 800 that are in Niger, and you're over 5,000 of the supposed 6,000 troops. That leaves you with about 1,000 troops. There's 54 countries in Africa, and any given day we might have an exercise, say in Uganda, Natural Fire or Eastern Accord, and in that we might have about 300 or 400 U.S. troops. Take that out, that leaves about 500 or 600. Okay, the 500 or 600 are spread out, and they're including all of the personnel assigned to U.S. embassies and diplomatic missions, of which those serving in attaché and security cooperation positions on a regular basis, actually living in Africa, is under 300. So that leaves you with about 300 or 400 U.S. troops in Africa. And with 300 or 400 U.S. troops in Africa, those are people in the short-term things that Ovigwe and I were just talking about, in which a team of 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 go and they help do familiarization for counter-mine operations or human rights training, things like that. So in the Sahel, and I'll let Ovigwe jump back into this, in the Sahel, people seem to have this impression that we have battalions of U.S. infantry running around fighting against AQIM and Boko Haram and all these other people in the Sahel. No, we have at most probably about 200 special operations troops who are advisors to Nigerian forces, to Malian forces, and to the Nigerians and others. So does that sound accurate to you, Ovigwe, or is that tracking with what you know?
Yeah, it does, because you remember when there was this fatality case or this incident where some U.S. special forces were killed, in Niger, and
Yes.
a lot of maybe people in the United States didn't know about that, but it was open knowledge that there's a U.S. Air base in Agadez, and of course the base will mean there are troops there. So it's always the special forces. There's no time you look in the news or any report, in the war front, whether it's in Mali or it's in Lake Chad Basin or in Burkina Faso, where you see U.S. regular U.S. infantrymen there. No, it's always African troops or regional security forces. Then maybe UN peacekeeping force, and then forces from Operation Barkhane, which is French, French-led, operation. So it's the French, and then the two foreign, forces really on the ground is the French and of UN peacekeeping, which is a multilateral effort. So these are like the two main ones that are in the region.
Yeah, absolutely. And so just a little bit of shameless self-promotion here. I did a video on this past week in which I call it Debunking the Myth of U.S. Bases in Africa or something like that in response to that article. Nick Turse's article is well-researched. It's full of accurate information and facts, including interviews with senior officers at the U.S. Africa Command, Army Africa, and others. Nothing not factual there, but the problem is the narrative is painted in a fashion to give the impression that the U.S. is militarizing and taking over Africa. He talks about $330 million of base building in Africa. And if you look at the information, it's over the course of 5 fiscal years, so it works out to $66 million per year out of a $705 billion defense budget. I don't think anyone notices the $66 million spent on bases in Africa. And if you look at the total figure, $330 million over 5 years, $286 million of that is for Camp Lemonnier, again, the base in Djibouti, which predates Africa Command and is not going anywhere as long as Djibouti allows us to lease it. The Chinese have a naval base there. The Japanese have an air base there. The French have a base there. It seems to be the place for all the military to show up, and it's like the surface of Mars. It's very unpleasant there. I've been there. So then in addition to that, 286 there, and then from Manda Bay, which is a Kenyan Special Forces base and a military base on the coast, the Swahili coast of Kenya, which the U.S. has sent troops for similar training and cooperation for decades. and operate out of Manda Bay, but it's not our base, it's a Kenyan base. But because it was attacked by al-Shabaab and we lost people there recently, we're spending another $34 million, something like that, over the course of this time. So by the end of this, you have about $8, $9, $10, $12 million being spent on base construction in Africa outside those two locations. So the 330 million suddenly becomes about 10 million over the course of 5 years, or 2 million per year. And most of that is to buy a new oil storage tank at the drone base in Agadez and fix the security fencing. So people take information and they create narratives to mislead people, either intentionally or to serve a purpose, or maybe they think they've got a hot news story and they're just not good of analysis. But anyway, that's kind of what's happening there. So hey, let's shift a little bit. We've talked about this topic of the herders and pastoralists, which I find fantastic. Hank says, thanks to both of us for clarifying the issue of presence. I think it's good to hear from an African voice in Nigeria, reinforcing that no, you don't see battalions of Americans running around. But let's talk about you and I were discussing medical diplomacy. And I think you were talking about what China is trying to do in the face of Wuhan coronavirus, COVID-19. Specifically, China had sent a medical team to Algeria in early March, and by all accounts, it's been helpful as far as we know. But China's getting a lot of credit for helping Africa with masks and protective equipment, things like that. But the reality is that the Chinese government's not doing that. That's from Jack Ma, who's a billionaire, who's doing it as a personal thing on his own behalf. By comparison, Steve Harvey, the American comedian, just donated 7.2 million pounds of personal protective equipment masks to Botswana. Should the U.S. government take credit for Steve Harvey's private actions? No, because it's Steve Harvey out of the goodness of his heart and his wife. And by the same token, it's Jack Ma. It's not the Chinese government. Although he's very close to the Chinese government, it is Jack Ma. But the Chinese government did, on its own initiative, send a team to Algeria in March. They later announced a team of 19 going to Nigeria. And I'll let Ovigwe tell you what happened when they decided to do that. So please tell us what happened.
It was a crisis.
It was a crisis. How so? What happened, Ovigwe? Do tell.
It was nothing short of a crisis, because I think what the Chinese did, they just prepared. I think what they did when they decided to do this whole sending experts abroad is like they just drop a list of countries and like, you know what, we're going to send people here, 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 and here, and they didn't really take out time to judge the environment, to do some form of due diligence. Because if you notice what happened is that immediately the government announced that the Nigerian government announced that Chinese experts will be coming to Nigeria. The very next day, the National Union of Journalists in Nigeria issued out a report saying we don't want them here. When the Chinese landed in Italy, that's when the cases in Italy even got worse. I'm telling you, that was on document. The day after that, the Nigerian Medical Association followed with a statement repeating that same line. That when the Chinese landed in Italy, that's when the cases got worse. So that nobody knows how true or false that is, but that tells you it was coming from fear, right? So the Nigerian public quickly picked it up, and oh my goodness, everyone on Nigerian social media, there were very few people that were for Chinese experts coming. So we had that issue. And you have to understand the Nigerian mentality. We are not short of doctors, and at the time the Chinese experts were coming in, our number of cases were somewhere around 100 or so, and then the number of deaths were less than 10. So it begs the question: what are they coming to do? The hospitals are not overflowed with, overflowing with patients like you had in Italy or in France and so on and so forth. We didn't have a shortage of doctors in Nigeria. If anything, we export doctors. There are a lot of Nigerian doctors in the US, in Europe. So, and there are many more. We're just waiting for travel restrictions to be lifted so that they go abroad. So it was a case of why not employ the doctors that we have here, to deal with the situation rather than bring people from China. If they are coming, if they have experience or technical knowledge to share, they can do that via Skype like we're doing now. So that was really the issue with the Nigerian public. We don't need medical experts to come. Yes, we need masks. Yes, we need other essential medical supplies. Yes, we need information sharing and knowledge sharing, but we don't need Chinese experts to come. And I tell you, it was driven by xenophobia. It was driven, by just a very clear assessment of the situation. We're not short of manpower. So that was really it. And then when you could see, it was so funny. I said, so when they eventually came, what the government now did, was put them in a 14-day isolation, so that we see if, just to satisfy the Nigerian public, because they're like, we can't stop them from coming. Okay, now they came, and then we just say, okay, you know what, we isolate them for 14 days. And then on that day, I remember tweeting out that, the Chinese experts are here. They're going to be on isolation, like that, and the government is not necessarily responding to. It's not necessarily, bowing to the Nigerian public, because the public didn't want them to come, but at least it's taking steps to sort of like show that they heard what the Nigerian side was saying. Then, a Chinese journalist just tweeted under that and to tell me, it has nothing to do with Nigerian public response. I'm serious. The guy from CGTN. It was quite surprising. I'm like, what are you saying? This is Nigeria. Yes, our government can be shitty, but they listen, and especially in situations like this where they know they need public cooperation, public support, right? Yeah. So it was. I found it quite disingenuous. Like, it was gaslighting. Why would you tell me in Nigeria that I don't know what's going on in the country, when it's not even my opinion? The whole of the country on social media was just all against this from the beginning. So and then I think about a week ago or thereabouts, they completed a 14-day period, and then they joined the efforts in the country. But again, it's not doing much. So I think what they were able to do in Algeria, maybe the Algerians needed help. In Nigeria, it was just a total miscalculation. And not long after, we had the issue in Guangzhou, and that just made it even worse.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, of course, you do know, of course, that only Europeans and North Americans are paternalistic. No one else is paternalistic, right? You know that, correct?
Yeah.
So let me add to this story. So he's talked about the Nigerian public's response to this. Mine, and I'm gonna mention this. I'll make 3 points, and then we'll discuss a little bit further. But so my point on this is that I was following the Nigerian medical community's response to this, and the Nigerian Medical Association took great umbrage with this. They were very angry because, as Avigwe says, Nigeria has doctors. This isn't the Central African Republic where they have nothing. No doctors, no electricity, no food, no governance. Nigeria does have a functioning government. People may not always be happy with it. It does have a professional class. It does have lots of educated people, and it does have healthcare. Maybe not enough, maybe not where it needs to be, but you do have professional, well-trained physicians and nurses and such across the country. So they took great exception to this and took it as an insult when the Chinese decided to send a medical team to help Nigeria with the crisis, because they didn't need it. So that's the first point. Now, the first thing. So here's 3 points about Nigeria. To Nigeria's great credit, when the U.S. Africa Command was new over a decade ago, one of the things they first did was create this thing called the Pandemic Response Program. And what it was a program funded by U.S. Africa Command, working with the Centers for Disease Control and the National Institutes for Health, I believe, back in the States. But I wasn't on that end. I was in Africa. So I did it through Africa Command. And what they did is they would help countries in Africa build plans for how to respond to pandemic outbreaks. And contact tracing, surveillance and monitoring, testing, all of these things that are necessary, and the phrases you've been hearing in the wake of COVID-19, or if you remember for SARS, same sort of thing. All these words that the layperson doesn't usually hear, this was all part of the pandemic. Now, Nigeria was an active and enthusiastic participant in these events that happened 3 or 4 times a year for several years. And they went to Rome for conferences. They went to Southeast Asia. They went across Africa, and they shared best practices and such. And they also helped develop plans. Well, the Nigerian health ministry took this experience, and the military, because it was with the civil and military sector, and they developed plans that they already had in place and improved them. So that when the Ebola outbreak took place in the Mano River region around Guinea, Sierra Leone, and Liberia starting December 2013, but really the world didn't notice it till August of 2014. But when the world noticed it and people started traveling from Liberia back to Nigeria and brought the virus in, the Nigerian health officials were on the spot, quick. They isolated, they quarantined, they separated people, and they kept Nigeria, a country of 200 million people, from being devastated by Ebola in 2014. Kudos to the Nigerian health profession. Brilliant job. never really talked about by anybody except maybe a few Nigerians. Really, a lot of attention should be paid. It should be a case study. So when this happened, I gave a lot of credit to the Nigerian authorities because the number of cases were very low in the beginning. But it appears that regardless of the interventions we take, it's like influenza. People are going to get affected by it. Most of them, thankfully, asymptomatic. So I'm not surprised to see the cases in Nigeria growing now. And I don't think that's because of the failure on the part of Nigerians. I just think it's because there's 200 million people in close proximity in many places, and this is a very contagious virus, and it's difficult to stop it, short of burning everything around you and putting a bubble over yourself. So a lot of kudos to the Nigerian health profession, but they were very angry about that response. Did you follow that as well, about how the Nigerian Medical Association and other folks were angry, their doctors?
Yes, of course, I did. They were the second community of people to speak. That's the NME, Nigerian Medical Association. They came out strong. The press secretary was really emphatic, and also the president of the association also. So it was and we Nigerians, we respect our doctors a lot. I know it's cliche everywhere in the world, doctors are respected, but in Nigeria, there are certain professions that we still hold up high. The judiciary has lost, standing, but the doctors definitely want, if not number one, at least in the top three. So when they spoke, Nigerians listened, and I think they really set the stage for the resistance. Because when the NUJ spoke, that's the Nigerian Union of Journalists spoke. Yeah, it was in the news, but not as heavy as when the doctors spoke. Of course, it's their area of expertise, and people should actually listen to doctors in this area, but that aside, the association is very well respected, and that really made it very difficult for that diplomacy. See, the thing about medical with a diplomacy is that it has to be a capable and willing donor matching the needs of a recipient, a desperate recipient. In this case, we're in desperate, so it was a diplomacy done really wrong.
Yeah, those are good points. So Hank Cloper has a comment here. He said the same sort of story with Cuban doctors who were sent to South Africa. I absolutely agree. It's one thing to send Cuban doctors to Angola in 1975. They were needed. There weren't many doctors, or Mozambique. But sending Cuban doctors to South Africa is just gratuitous. I think a lot of people saw through that. But that's just more of the left-leaning socialist ANC fellow traveler aspect with the Cubans. Whereas in the Chinese case, I would argue that this is an effort to a strategic communications campaign to take attention away from the origins of the virus and people blaming China for it. So that's what was really going on in Nigeria, but it backfired on them. So let's shift base a little bit here. You and I were talking about before we came on the program about the impact of the lockdown and how it's contributed or not contributed to a rise in crime. Are you seeing a rise in crime in Nigeria? And if so, is it all across the board, or is it in metropolitan centers, or do you have any information on that or any analysis?
Yeah, it started, I think, for the first week of the lockdown, it was pretty cool and quiet because a lot of people were anxious. And then towards the end of the first week, started hearing about, breaking and entry, robberies in estate that weren't usually, robbed. And by the second week, it was everywhere. So initially, lockdown was in Abuja, the capital, then Lagos, which is our commercial nerve center, and then Ogun State, just a state next to Lagos. So these three states were put on lockdown, and then it was really, really hellish by the second week. The police had to step up their game, increase community policing, vigilance, stay more vigilant, started patrolling more, because it was really bad in Lagos and Ogun State. People were being robbed left, right, and center. Houses were being broken into, and then by the third week, and in Abuja here, a food truck was just attacked by a mass of people. So the first week was started with real criminality, I would say pure criminality. But by the first and second week rather, by the third week it became desperation, right? So the two factors I think really drove the upsurge in crime in metropolitan areas, that is Abuja, Lagos, and Ogun State, especially Lagos and Ogun State, was a mixture of criminality and desperation. People got really desperate. The country is really huge. 90 million people in Nigeria don't know where their meal is going to come from. We are, as they say, the poverty capital of the world. So to put such a huge population that is unprepared on lockdown, it's criminal in a sense. But at the same time, it's what everybody was recommending. WHO was saying it, everybody was saying it. So because we didn't have a choice, because if we didn't, then it would seem as if the government is responsible. But so to mitigate that, the government started putting out palliative measures. But of course, being a cash-strapped government, we just couldn't reach. They couldn't even reach 2% of people who will need the help. So it just became really, really bad for many people, many families, and children who just can't. There was a case in Abuja here. A taxi driver just, by the second week, he was stopped by the police and asked why he was out walking. And he just started taking off his clothes and shouting that what do they want him to do? He has children at home. He has to feed them. He has to come out to look for money. So that's really how aggressive or how intense the situation got. But it seems to be getting better now in terms of crime, because, like I said, the police in Lagos and Ogun State and everywhere, they really stepped up their game. But at the same time, too, we're easing restrictions. People are coming out more. Businesses are opening up, and the informal economy, which is like the major, part of the Nigerian economy, is slowly creeping back, to work. So there's less apprehension or less social apprehension right now.
Well, food security is what you're touching on there, and for those who live in rural areas, it's traditionally less of a problem because they have access to food in some sort. Worst case, they can slaughter their sheep or their goats or their cattle if necessary, or crops. But increasingly, Africa is becoming more and more urbanized, and you have mega cities like Lagos and Abuja is becoming a mega city. It's not there yet, but you have this increased urbanization. It's not like people in the urban centers have gardens on their roofs or around their yards, so that really becomes an issue for them. Another aspect of this that's not really looked at or not talked about much is that a lot of food in the food supply is stuff that takes a long time to prepare. So, for instance, you'll find cuts of beef and lamb and other products, poultry, that are in freezers and delivered in cold storage to supermarkets and such. Well, if things aren't slaughtered, eventually those stockpiles dwindle. We have a situation here in the Western United States now where the potatoes that were previously harvested are being dumped because they have to take the ones in their fields now, and some of them can't get enough labor because of restrictions to harvest the potatoes properly. So very soon in the United States, there will be a mass shortage of French fries, which doesn't sound like a catastrophe, but starches are important, and French fries make up a big part of people's diet. So we're going to see the great French fry shortage as a COVID-19 outcome here before too long. But since we're talking about food security, let's talk a little bit about, we're talking security holistically. Let's talk about economics a little bit here, foreign direct investment and other things. But Nigeria recently got a large loan in terms of Africa, $3.4 billion from the IMF. Now, that's interesting, and hopefully that will help. But Nigeria will lose over $30 billion likely this year from lost oil revenue as a consequence of the collapse of oil. Is this not a true situation, or what do you think about that?
Yeah, that's really, really going to be very impactful, because now you have a situation where the government is complaining for funds. Yes, I know the main situation now across Africa is debt relief. But at the same time, there's need for fiscal stimulus, because we're talking about the economy is going back to work. How are we going to get the ball rolling again? We would need money. So Nigeria just took in loan from the IMF, under rapid financing instruments, even though we applied using rapid credit facility. I don't know why our minister failed to do that, but anyway. So what we're going to do with that, of course, try to put into investment. One of the mistakes we always made in the past was you borrow money to pay salaries, and that's so unproductive. It has always hurt the Nigerian economy, people, and productivity. But in this case, the government is saying, "Oh, we do that to ensure put into investment into places where there will be returns, and then we can pay, because I think we have 3 to 5 days to repay back the loan." So, but generally speaking, oil demands are down, oil prices are down, and that's taking a huge blow in the economy. And FDI flows, of course, not anytime soon, because coming from many people might not know, but the United States actually, I think, number 1 or number 2 in terms of foreign direct investment into the continent of Africa. And we we get, and also with FDI, diaspora remittances are another source of, forex for Nigeria also. So all of these are going to be dried up, because, the global economy is not really functioning. The US is not, it's still struggling to open up the economy. Europe is still, struggling. So it's going to be really tough, and right now it's a matter of time before, now it seems just the US is asking, or Australia, maybe one or two MPs in Australia asking, why did China do this, or this is a Chinese, operation, and so on and so forth. It's a matter of time before Africans will join the cry to start saying, oh, maybe we need something from the Chinese, beyond debt relief. But I doubt that's ever going to be the case because, relationship is it's very weird.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. No, the reason I mentioned the loan is because 3.4 billion, it seems rather large, but in the scheme of things, it's not that big. Nigeria has over $500 billion economy now since it's been remeasured. Yeah. But losing at least $30 billion in oil revenue, that won't all go to the government. They'll get royalties and taxes, but it does affect the economy. That's hard currency not coming in the country. And you touched on another topic, which a lot of analysts frequently miss or overlook, and that's the importance of remittances. Here in the U.S., if people think about remittances, most often we're thinking about Haitians or Latin Americans working in the United States and sending money back home. But for Nigeria and for much of Africa, remittances make a big deal. So think, people, the actions that take place in other countries have a direct impact on countries like Nigeria. So for instance, there are a lot of Nigerians living in the United Kingdom, a lot of Nigerians. And many of those Nigerians send money back regularly to family back in Nigeria so they can survive, buy clothing, food, pay school fees, whatever the things are. So if people in the UK, for instance, are locked down and can't go to work and earn a living, how can they send a remittance back to their larger extended family in Nigeria, for example, and help them? And that creates a serious problem from a security perspective. Would you agree?
Yes, I will, because it means it will take longer for the Nigerian economy to recover. So on one hand, we can't sell oil, or the oil is not delivering the cash. And mind you, we had more forex, or more money came into Nigeria via the diaspora remittances than FDI in 2019. Wow. and even the year before. So it says a lot. So if people are not getting cash from their relatives abroad, we can't do so much in the country. And like I said, whether it's the informal economy in Nigeria, that people just go about selling stuff or buying stuff, trading, not necessarily paying taxes, as we have with big companies. These sectors rely on huge consumer spending, right? So if people aren't making enough money, or they're not these professionals are not sending money to their families or people here, people won't spend so much, and then you will just have like a worsening situation in terms of poverty and hunger, and therefore that could really exacerbate the situation that's already bad. So I think going forward, the economics is not really. I know the government would still keep blaming the global economy for the issue, but once we start seeing growth in other parts of the world and growth in economic activity reopening, for us, we'll start asking the question: okay, when are we going to start getting back to growth again? Because of course, recession is definitely what we're in right now, and it's going to take much longer. And the thing about Nigeria is this. Yeah, we rarely give the government headache over poverty and food insecurity, because I think it's never really been that much of an issue in the country. Like there never been any protests over there's hunger in the land or stuff like that, like you find it in some other countries. So the security situation is going to be more civil security rather than national security. So you just have to see what we'll see will be more increase in maybe armed robbery or unrest at the civil level, but not necessarily people taking up their complaints to the government.
Well, it's there's a couple comments in the chat here. I'm going to mention them now. So I guess one thing that's really important in the midst of all this Obigwe, is that you really at times have to have a sense of humor, I think. And so Sonia has popped in. She's joined the stream, and she says, "Good afternoon, fellow friends and inmates from South Africa." I think a sense of humor sometimes really is necessary. Appreciate the sense of humor there, Sonia, as we talk about less than appealing things when it comes to security and the COVID-19 crisis. Well, she's followed up by a question from Hank once again. I don't have any numbers on this, and I don't know if you do, but maybe you can take a stab at it. So Hank asked, unemployment percentage rise estimates for Nigeria during or following this lockdown. Does anyone have a handle on what unemployment was before, what it might be now, and what it might be as we come out of it? Do you have any thoughts on that or information?
Okay, so I'm actually looking for the numbers because the National Bureau of Statistics hasn't really come out with any number, from my knowledge. Like I've been, perusing through their Twitter feed for some time. I think maybe they really don't want to scare Nigerians. But the first major issue about unemployment that we heard was from Access Bank, one of the big banks in Nigeria, here saying they're going to slash salaries by, I think, about 50% or so, and probably lay off workers. So we've not heard anything about major job losses from any of the big corporations, whether it's DSTV or ShopRite or Dangote, the big corporation. Whenever there's not been any announcement as regards layoff, except Access Bank. So maybe that's why the NBS, as National Nigerian Bureau of Statistics, hasn't come out with any figure, because the major unemployment usually from the big corporation. The informal economy, or the bulk of Nigeria economy, if one or two businesses could just fire you wouldn't. That doesn't really factor into the national statistics. That really comes from major companies, and it's not their sources. Is not, even when they give figures, nobody still believes it, but the figure is still not out yet.
It's interesting the correlation in how things tie together. A lot of folks don't necessarily think of Nigeria and then think of South Africa in the same vein, or even associate them. But aside from the fact that both are regional hegemons and are the most important states in their region, respectively, and both compete for leadership in Africa to some degree, you just ran through a list of things that are all South African: DSTV, ShopRite, and then I can add to that MTN. A lot of South Africans don't realize that MTN is actually has I think 90 million subscribers, SIM cards in Nigeria, which is almost twice the size of the country of South Africa. So its major market is, although it's had challenges with the market in Nigeria with the courts, but its main market is not South Africa, even though it's a South African company. It's actually Nigeria. So there are economic ties between South Africa at the corporate level. And I think Hank just he just mentioned DSTV and ShopRite South African. Yeah, that's what I was getting to, Hank. So you're spot on. It's interesting to see these things. When it comes to unemployment numbers, that is a real challenge. At least here in the U.S., we have a feel for it because unemployment filings are the data is collected and reported by the federal government, states and federal government each week. And we have at least 23 to 26 million people who've lost their jobs as a consequence of COVID-19. Now, this comes in a country that in January, before this happened, we were desperate to find qualified workers and had nearly 8 million unfilled professional jobs in this country that we couldn't fill. And now we have 26 million people, say 25 million people unemployed as a consequence of this. It's absolutely insane. I mean, that's larger than most countries around the world. That's just workers. That's crazy. That's huge. That's probably about 15% of our workforce, at least. That's unprecedented. In the Great Depression, we might have had higher percentages, but we didn't have these numbers because the country was so much smaller. Really, really a shock to the system. So let's shift a little bit. We've not talked about the big issues that are security, and I think that's great because we really talked a holistic picture here. But if you don't mind, can you talk a little about the Boko Haram situation, where it's at right now? Because when people think of Nigeria, unfortunately, Boko Haram is something that always comes up, or it's the first thing they think of. It shouldn't be, but it's the first thing people outside Nigeria typically think of. So what's going on with Boko Haram? I understand there was an offensive action by Chad recently in Lake Chad Basin, and there was contact between. Anyway, if you could tell us a little bit about that and get us up to speed so that people have a feel for it.
Yeah, so one of the very interesting things just before COVID-19 started to dominate the news was the operation by the Chadians. So back in March, in March we had this situation where the Chadians in Boma region in Chad lost 92 soldiers to a Boko Haram attack, and it was immediately sensational because the Chadians they've never lost that number at all. If we're going to look at each of the countries in the region really involved, Cameroon, Nigeria, Chad, and Niger, everybody will agree with you that the Chadians have been the most gallant, right? So when that happened, it was even before the Chadians announced that they're going to have a dedicated operation as a retaliation against Boko Haram. People were already saying, "Oh, the Chadians are really going to give it hot to Boko Haram," and really, by the time they started mobilizing, you could see so much vigor and bitterness towards Boko Haram. The president Idris Deby of Chad led the effort himself, Operation Bohoma they called it, and they swept it, several camps, several thousands of weapons were recovered. There were pictures they were taken. I think it was on Associated Press or so. One Chadian soldier lying on top of packs of AK-47, and 1,000 Boko Haram fighters were reportedly killed. So by the time yeah, and this is not a figure that was disputed. Usually when you get maybe Nigeria or Nigerian or any of these countries put out a figure, you see Reuters or the major agencies really fact checking or going in. In this case, there was nothing that I saw that was disputing the figures, because they weren't even singing the figures out as this is what we've done. They were showing the evidence, like this is what we've done, and that really won Chad our popularity. The president himself on the battlefield, leading the troops, and everybody seeing evidence of what they are doing. It just was something that was very encouraging. However, that became a problem in itself, because on the Nigerian side, one of the criticism that Nigerians have is that the government is not taking that very decisive blow, and even if it does, it doesn't sustain it, right? And then there's no leadership. We don't see our president doing what Idris Deby is doing, even if both of them have military background, right? So there was this comparison that was going on, and and even the president of Chad was criticizing Nigeria, also saying, that Nigeria is not doing enough. I mean, that's straight criticism coming from a country that we've worked together, very closely over the years. It says a lot, and he made it seem as if it's a chronic situation. So see what he said. He said, Chad is alone shouldering all the burdens of the war against Boko Haram. That's a heavy statement, because it just overrides everything we know about the war, and people thinking that Nigeria is leading the regional response against Boko Haram. So a couple of days later, I think April 9th, the Nigerian High Command had to actually release a statement, or gave an interview to this day newspaper Nigeria, where the commander said, Nigeria has shown valor in Sierra Leone, in Liberia, started using other countries, sort of make a case, and said even in the 10-year long battle in the Chad Basin, Nigeria has really, done way more that the Chadians cannot just, ignore. So it became like a battle for who has done more, which, in my opinion, is a problem, because it shows that there's lack of leadership, and the cooperation is not as strong as many people think it's supposed to be, and it needs to actually be, because if we are to defeat Boko Haram, we have to be more united than we currently have, on the ground now. I mean, Boko Haram is not even alone; it's connected with all the insurgent groups, we have in the Sahel. So why would the terrorists seem to have more unity than the government, who are supposed to be, on the good side, of the war? So it's quite challenging. And of course, we just received some equipment, artillery equipment from I think Chinese. Yeah. So now we're expecting that, and they made a huge fuss about it, posting videos of the tanks and artillery weapons being delivered, transported from, right from the port in Lagos where they arrived, how they're moving into straight to the north, and it was quite a show. So all of that came as a response to winning back Nigerian public support, and popularity, because it was really bad, because Nigerians are almost asking in the army, show us your working, show us what you're doing. We're seeing what the Chadians are doing. But I think the real problem is the failure of leadership, or the fact that we can't really have two governments that can work and cooperate to defeat Boko Haram. We will need them to do more than this. Not one person claiming who did more, who didn't do more. It's just awful.
Well, Paulie's got an interesting question here. Before I get to it, you've raised some good questions too, but and made some excellent comments there. But before we get to it, let me make a couple points about this, and then raise a topic, and I'll mention Paulie's question, then give you a chance to get in. So a little complicated, but let me stage this. Okay. So when the multinational joint task force was reinvigorated, because it already existed for the Lake Chad Basin, but when it was reinvigorated in 2013, 2014, actually late 2013, to focus on Boko Haram. I was actually involved in that. I was in Abuja for a conference. It was the first official conference. There was a discrete conference that took place in London with the US, the UK, and Nigeria, and some other partners to discuss trying to address this. But then the first formal conference was in Abuja. After that, there was a conference in Cameroon, which I went to, and the third one was in N'Djamena, to draw up the rules, the command and control, the setup for how we go after Boko Haram. But when that happened, it just kind of brings to attention something for Paulie's question, something I'm going to mention now. Debe and Chad, not exactly paragons of democracy and human rights and equal treatment of folks, yet they're in the fight against Boko Haram. And this creates a very difficult position for a country that wants to help alleviate this problem, say the United States, United Kingdom, even China, if they want to help. Because do you help a government that's undemocratic and is accused of human rights abuses and unlawful detentions, and allow this situation to metastasize and spread across the region, which is what it did after it started in Nigeria. After several years, it spread to the entire Lake Chad Basin. So it puts countries like the U.S. who want to be donors and help in a very difficult position. You're accused of supporting tyrants and totalitarian states who aren't democratic, or you're accused of neglecting the human security needs of people who are victims of this sort of thing. So with that, let me go to Paulie's question here, and I'll read it out, and then I'll give you a chance to answer it, Ovigwe. So Paulie would like to know if you believe that more international assistance from the African Union or the UN or the EU to send forces to terminate Boko Haram once and for all, instead of relying on Nigerian National Command alone. Well, it's not just Nigerian, as we've seen. It's Chad, it's Niger, it's Cameroon, but especially it's really Nigeria and Chad carrying the heavy lift now. But Ovigwe, do you think that sending troops from any of those organizations would help the situation, or leave it to the regional forces to take care of it?
No, I think we have to look at the way the problem is. What we have it's not a Nigerian problem. It's a regional problem across West Africa, and there are several multilateral efforts that are currently in place to combat terrorism. Right. So, like I said, Boko Haram is not isolated. It's linked to Islamic State in West Africa. It's linked to AQ. It's linked to AQ in the Maghreb and other non-religious insurgent groups. Also, you have in northern Mali. So, if you look at the efforts that we have now, we have the G5 Sahel force, which is French, the francophone speaking countries at Mauritania, Niger, Burkina Faso, like that all coming together, Mali and Chad coming together to fight. But the problem with the G5 Sahel is funding. So it's not very well funded. We've seen several attempts to sort of change the situation. And the last time the G5 countries met with Macron in France, that was the issue. So they even come up with a new, strategy on how to make this more efficient and more productive. So that's one of the joint efforts, right? So on the Lake Chad Basin, you have the Lake Chad Basin countries: Nigeria, Cameroon, Chad, and Niger forming that multilateral joint task force also. So we already have these armies, right? But with the United Nations and the AU, in my opinion, I don't think they can play they can play a peacekeeping role, a peacemaking role. That's the UN and the AU can drive the non-military part of the conflict, but these countries actually can and should be the ones on the battlefield. I'm saying that because we have there are two dimensions to it. One is the fact that we don't even know if these armies should even be given the credit of being national armies if they can't even defend their territories. Like this coming from even going back as a state and what a state should do, and the capacity of a state to project power and occupy and be sovereign in its territory. So we have in countries where it's a fundamental issue. So if the UN comes and the AU comes and solves the problem and then they go, what happens when something like this comes up again? So we want it's best for the regional armies to face this head on, but with cooperation from their defense partners, like be it the US, the European Union, and so on and so forth. The AU and the EU, what the UN is doing in Mali with MINUSMA yes, of course, we need these international organizations to be there for peacekeeping, peace building, operation, and even peacemaking if possible, if they're part of any negotiation that will take place, if these terrorists decide to surrender. But fundamentally, my opinion is that these countries should use counterterrorism as a capacity building situation or problem, because we just cannot have a continent where armies don't have the capabilities, they don't have the intelligence or the resources or the experience to actually defend their own territories.
No, I like that response, Vigwe, and let me just jump in and say that I concur with that. You think you've hit it spot on. People lose sight of the fact they think everything's a military solution and you win on the battlefield and it's over. No, you can win on the battlefield and lose the conflict because the political solution is what matters in the end, because you have to resolve the political differences or exterminate the enemy. So it's the only two options, and extermination rarely works. So when you talk about the African Union and the AU, or excuse me, the United Nations, perhaps even ECOWAS or the G5 Sahel politically could play a role in helping resolve it politically. But from a standpoint of security forces, I don't think that there's a reason the French are in Mali, and it's complicated. We won't get into it today. But beyond the French, that would eat up another 3 hours, and I think people want to enjoy their Saturday. But really, I think skin in the game is what matters here for the forces in the region. And I think the reality you mentioned here is that the G5 Sahel, while it's a nice idea and it's a good intent, it's really underfunded and under-resourced to do what it needs to do as a multinational force. Now, a bit of a shameless self-promotion here once again. I actually was the person who was responsible for the first ever security cooperation event with the G5 Sahel by the U.S. government. I actually was a guest lecturer at the G5 Sahel Defense College in Nouakchott. So, kind of a cool thing about serving uniform is you get involved in some things early on, like the Multinational Joint Task Force against Boko Haram, and then this thing with the G5 Sahel. So kind of some neat stuff. So I think that you and I, there's no space between us. I think we kind of agree in the same fashion about what should happen here politically and militarily.
Yeah.
So go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, I say we have to look at this situation from a very holistic point of view. Now, if we want to solve terrorism, really, it's when you say declare war on terror, I think it's like you're declaring war on violence. With violence, it doesn't really work like that. Even if you can defeat them militarily, it's an ideology, and that will require a much broader approach. Because to be really frank, you cannot achieve peace through security. You achieve security through peace, and for us to build. To get peace, we have to use non-military tools available in negotiation, so on and so forth, and that way build that culture of peace and using peaceful means to protest or to not all the time, not ideologically, but really if you look at the complaints that is driving Boko Haram, for instance, or Al-Qaeda, you can't really fight that. Because it just keeps multiplying, and with poverty and misery in the background in this part of the world in Sahel, Of course, recruitment is almost at an infinity, potential. So you just producing people, and then you have more and more fighters, to deal with. So the political aspect of it, we're seeing signs of possible negotiation with some factions in Mali, right? And I hope that continues. In Nigeria, nothing much on that front, nothing yet, but hopefully, as we degrade them more, of course, hopefully they might come up to negotiate, maybe ceasefire. Hopefully, I doubt, because these people can be very crazy.
Well, a couple points here very quickly, Ovigwe. Number one, okay, if we get cut off at some point, which sometimes happens with my streams, I'm still trying to figure that out. That'll just end it for today if we do get cut off. But Paulie has a comment. He said, "Hey, thanks for your comment and view. It does go far deeper than just taking out Boko Haram and disbanding them." So Paulie's in agreement that it's a political situation that needs to be addressed. But let me ask you this, Ovigwe. Look, we've gone for an hour and 15 minutes. This has been fantastic. I really enjoyed it. I think the audience has enjoyed it as well. Can you stay a little bit longer and we'll talk about the Niger Delta briefly before you go?
Sure.
Okay, well, let's do that then. Let's shift our focus away from the Sahel and further south into the tropical regions of Nigeria, down to the Niger Delta, which is the location of the vast resources of petroleum that onshore and offshore that Nigeria has. And there's been talk in the past about oil bunkering, which of course is a dangerous situation, people blowing themselves up and causing environmental damage, but also piracy and things like that. So what's the situation in the Niger Delta, and is it a problem today, or does nobody care because oil is cost nothing a barrel?
No, I think you pretty much hit the nail on the head there, because one, right now, I think the problem in Niger Delta has stopped being a national issue, because it doesn't really impact the economy anymore. Of course, we know there's massive corruption in the Nigerian army, and part of the people there, in part of the arrangement, sort of the amnesty program has been productive on that front, because most of the leaders like General Boilo, Tompolo, and these guys were the main leaders of the militants. They disarmed. They are somewhere chilling with the millions that the government gave them to stop fighting. But what has come of that now, and which I think should be addressed, is piracy in the Gulf of Guinea. That has been massive for the past 5 years, even longer. But at least in the last 5 years, has gotten really, 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 really bad. There's hardly any month that you don't hear of sailors being captured, whether it's a Greek flotilla or all over the place. Usually around the Nigerian part of the Gulf of Guinea, which covers the West Africa maritime domain. So that tells you something. Former Niger Delta militants, which is a region I grew up in, and I can tell you for a fact, I started operating boat engines, that's speedboat engines, when I was 7, 8. So it's a norm. Those guys are really into piracy now, because that's the next best thing. Many of them could not even make it into the official amnesty program, which was trying to retrain and reintegrate them into society. So if you can't explain piracy in the Gulf of Guinea now without talking about the fallout of the amnesty program and Niger Delta. So we don't have issues with oil bunk. We don't have issues with people blowing up pipes like they used to, but we have issues with oil bunkering. That's still going on, right? Despite all efforts from the Nigerian Navy and the Nigerian Army. And then another issue that has come up of the amnesty program, or the inadequacy of the amnesty program, is piracy. So piracy, oil bunkering, they're like Niger Delta crisis 2.0.
Well, I've yet to see what the global oil consumption is in the midst of this crisis. Usually Energy Information Agency, which is a U.S. government actor that publishes information on energy across the board, but also petroleum. I have not seen any recent data. They usually have it, so I'm wondering when that'll come out. But before COVID-19, the average day, the world consumed at this point about 101 to 103 million barrels of oil per day. My estimate is that that's probably about 35 million barrels at most right now around the world, maybe more, but probably 35 million or less. So I suspect that sometime soon, you may find producers paying Nigerians not to pump the oil because there's nowhere to store it. What do you think about that?
Yeah, we even had this issue in March, early March, or no, or February. There was this case of Nigeria and Angola. We can't even sell our oil cargoes anymore. We had like a glut. So this was even before even before the lockdown. So it's a huge problem for the economy, because now people can't sell, at least as at that time. And the question now is, how does government get funding to pay salaries to go on with development of the country and so on and so forth. So um, oil has lost its lost. I think we're in a post oil era, so we won't. If for anything, militants are not going to come back to militancy is not something that will come back, because oil has lost its value. When militancy was in the Niger Delta, oil was selling at what, 80, 90. At some point it was really high. So it's a problem for the economy that we can't sell oil, and the government can't get foreign exchange to do what it wants, to buy goods and so on and so forth. But there's nothing the Nigerian government can do. So when we had the OPEC plus fallout between Saudi Arabia and Russia, all we could do was just to wait for these two big countries to actually, well, Saudi Arabia is not really a big country, but yeah, in the oil space it's a major player. So all we can do is just wait. So it's the political and the political inadequacy of the Nigerian government in international space, and even African government, is really hurting us, because we can't influence OPEC. You just have to wait. We can't influence the market. We just have to wait. It's different from some countries can do something tomorrow, and then oil prices can change. So for us, we don't have that capability. So we just have to wait, and then the external environment will let us know what it wants, and then we'll just do.
Well, it's interesting you talk about that, because we've been talking about security this whole time. And when it comes to security, the overdependence on one particular commodity or resource for driving your economy or having a major impact on it can be devastating when things go the other direction. We see this for Nigeria repeatedly, but never more so than what's happening right now, where the value of oil is almost nothing because there's just too much of it. So nobody's willing to buy it, and there's nowhere to store it. So when you rely so heavily on oil, which Nigeria still does, even after 50 years and over $1 trillion of revenue from oil, they're still heavily dependent on it. But they're not the only country. People think of South Africa, it's synonymous with gold and the Kruger end. But South Africa is now only the world's 10th largest gold producer, and most of its gold mines are unprofitable. And they've been looking at shutting them down because they can't make a profit. The South Africans have to dig so deep under the surface to get to the gold these days that the cost of doing that are prohibitively high. And so actually the world's largest gold producer is China. Most people don't know that. It's actually China. It's not Australia. It's not Russia. It's not the United States or Canada, but it's China. And so South Africa is down there 10th. But other examples are Botswana and its overdependence on diamonds, which accounts for 2/3 of export earnings and 75% of the government's revenue. Even 50 years after the country first discovered diamonds, they're still heavily dependent on them, and mining in general. And then, of course, famously, Zambia has been over-reliant on copper for decades since independence. Anytime copper takes a tank, Zambia's economy falls on its bottom because it depends on it. So this, when it comes to security, is something that argues very heavily for economic diversification, a diverse service-based economy, and light manufacturing or heavy manufacturing, a mix of all these things, including agriculture. You think that's important when it comes to security? I imagine you do. I mean to speak for you, so let me ask you.
Yeah, of course. But the thing is, we've had for long economic diversification, post-oil, plans, especially in Nigeria. I don't really know about Zambia, but I know in Nigeria, for instance, we've been hearing about how we want to diversify our economies. But yes, we have a lot of economic activity in other sectors, be it agriculture, food processing to some extent. But we just haven't been able to figure out what else we can offer the world and really get revenue from. So it's just the oil. So for now, I think we're talking about industrialization and manufacturing. Well, I think right now we just have to wait and see if the fallout from the trade war and decoupling from China can bring some jobs or some manufacturing jobs to Africa. Because right now, if that doesn't happen, there really is no no chance. There's nothing we can produce. Okay, maybe there's some commodities that we cannot produce cheaper than China, right? But infrastructure is not there, right? So even if we want to diversify our economy, it takes a whole lot of infrastructure, to maybe do agriculture put agriculture as our main source of revenue or some other sector, right? So, and the government is still slow in terms of building the necessary infrastructure, the ports, the rail, the road, and the machinery to do all that. So, in the meantime, there's really no, it's all talk and nothing, on the ground. It's one of the reasons why, Nigerians or Africans, have come to like the Chinese. It's not as if we have any affinity towards China. It's the fact that, you see so many infrastructure projects being done, and you just see Chinese faces or Chinese money, behind it, because these countries and Nigeria and many African countries have a huge infrastructure deficit. And if you cannot talk, there's a popular saying that people in international affairs here will say, if you're not talking infrastructure, you are talking nonsense, right? Because you have populations growing so fast, so heavy, so urbanizing, and even just to think Lagos, for instance. Lagos has been talking about light rail for 20 years. 20 years. Just think about that. Meanwhile, other countries, maybe whether in Egypt or even the trains they use in China 20 years ago are different from the one they use now. Why we are still talking about, building, a light rail. So that it's of course, this has nothing to do, with the globe. This is just endemic corruption and misrule to begin with. And then, of course, the access to funding. So you can have a government in place that might want to do it, they can access funding just in time, and then before you know it, there's another person coming with another proposal, and the election cycle, and before you know it, the whole thing is gone. So it's going to be very hard for Africa to diversify its economy without it being forced to externally or be inspired by external reality from within the continent or within African countries themselves. I won't speak for all of the continent, but I know Ethiopia is doing quite well, trying, to really get manufacturing and other, industrial parks and so on and so forth. Nigeria has done well. We've built, Lekki Free Trade Zone. We've built some free trade zone in the country to try to bring in, people, industrial parks, people to manufacture. But it's not really, we can't base our economy on that just yet. But if you have a case where, European companies are, decoupling from China, of course, West African countries can position themselves. And I think that's something we should be talking about now. But everybody just seems to be obsessed with, debt relief, and so on and so forth. What we should be thinking about now is, how do we get Europe to start looking at West Africa, countries like Senegal, mostly Senegal and Guinea or Morocco, that proximity to Europe, right? Senegal, for instance, or Cote d'Ivoire, this country, they have huge young population also. How do we get this part of the continent to become, Europe's factory, right? Because, we're not in any geopolitical competition with Europe. So, not anytime soon. So why aren't we doing the manufacturing? We have the people to. All we just have to do is to build the infrastructure, both human and physical, and then we can begin to steal Chinese jobs.
Well, there's a couple things there, but you mentioned the Lagos Light Rail project. Listen, my brother, it could be a lot worse. You could be California and try to implement the high-speed rail project and spend $13 to $18 billion and now have no rail project. It's dead in the water after spending all that money. So it could be worse. Really? It could be worse. But you're right. The Europeans and the Americans, particularly, really need to get in the game, because they're going to miss the opportunities in Africa for them to profit and for Africans to profit by not investing in Africa and getting involved. One good example of this is Morocco, which has a very sound macroeconomic plan for entering West African ECOWAS countries in particular, but West African Francophone countries initially. And so they have a number of businesses. The king came up with this plan, his team put it together, and they've been executing it now for the better part of about 15 years. And so you see Moroccan insurance companies that have a presence by either buying into and becoming a shareholder or buying out existing insurance companies in the Francophone parts of West Africa, and they're profitable. They went there because of proximity and language, but also because of ECOWAS. So very smart on the part of Morocco. But anyway, so the Europeans and Americans need to get in the game. Well, let's see. So we've gone for about an hour and a half here. And what I want to do is before we wrap up, we've covered a lot of ground. We've talked about Boko Haram, Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, the Sahel, the Lake Chad Basin, Chad, foreign direct investment, remittances, medical diplomacy, the Niger Delta, pastoralists and herders, and many more things I'm sure I've neglected to mention here as we wrap up. But before we go, Ovigwe, I'd really like to ask if you have any final thoughts or comments you'd like to add, or something a place you might want to direct people to become more familiar with you, or something like that. Just let us know. It's a moment for you to share your thoughts with us. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think first of all, I think it's a very good initiative being on the show to discuss these issues with you, because you've got experience on the continent. I always like situations where you've got someone from outside of Africa that knows the continent, been here, worked here, and then also having someone here to give that very balanced perspective. It's been great being talking to the audience and being here. And personally, I think going forward, we as a continent, or the world in general, really have to really sit back to understand some of the major issues and how we can work together. They talk about collaboration, but I mean, just look at how the European Union came up with its own plan to raise funding, and the US wasn't involved, Russia wasn't involved, China wasn't involved, and the WHO will come up with its own. US Security Council, I think we're voting on COVID-19 response. The US wasn't involved. Like, there's so much fragmentation in international relations right now that there's no one issue that we can talk about that everybody agrees on. The only thing that I think the whole world agrees on right now is debt relief for Africa. And it's kind of funny because debt relief doesn't even solve our problem. It's just like it's surface issue, right? Our main problem in the continent is not even debt; it's debt productivity and interest rates. Those are the problems. So anybody talking development in Africa that isn't really looking at deep underlying issues, and I think even Africans too have their responsibility to begin to sort of look at population control, population management, because we're just growing, and all of these issues, all of this. Growing faster than our economies means we're also not doing ourselves any good. So on both sides, whether those we in Africa here, or international community, I think the COVID-19, this lockdown, or this period that the world is in shock, should be a time of real sober reflection. But yeah, that's
no, those are great comments. I really appreciate it. You touched on one thing there we didn't really go into here, and I'll probably do a video on it again sometime soon, and that's the issue of debt in Africa. But what people lose sight of, and you've touched on a very important aspect of it there, it's what you're paying for the debt. Debt can be manageable. I'm not advocating debt, but it can be manageable, certainly for governments, if it's affordable. So for the United States issues debt, we're paying less than 1% or 1% on Treasury notes. Inflation is higher than that. The government's actually making money by issuing debt because the future dollars are worth less than the money today, because we're paying 1% interest and inflation is 3 to 4%. So, it's a win-win game for the U.S. government when it issues debt, other than we have a continuing growing debt. That's the problem. But South Africa, for instance, now has junk bond status, and so they have to borrow money at 7, 8, 9%, which is a very high interest rate, and that's a serious problem. So if it's sustainable, if you can service the debt, and if you're getting the debt at a reasonable price, then it's something to do. But the issue here is what are you paying for it? And that's a real topic. Well, I'd like to thank you, Ovigwe. I really appreciate coming on the program. For those who don't know, we've been in touch over LinkedIn for some time. We see each other's things that we produce online and interviews and such, and comment on posts we do on LinkedIn. And so he approached me and said, "Hey, I'd like to come on the program." And I said, "I'd love to have you on." And here we have it today in the midst of the Wuhan coronavirus COVID-19 lockdown. We have this program. So this is part of what I'm trying to do now as a regular Saturday guest appearance on the program. So my profound thanks to Ovigwe Egu, our Nigerian analyst and writer who specializes in security, geopolitics, and development in Africa. I think it's been a fantastic hour and a half. I would appreciate if folks enjoyed Ovigwe's appearance here. I'd really appreciate some comments after the stream or put it in the comment section for the video. If you'd like to see him come back, please let us know, because I'd like to have him come back. But I mean, if nobody asks for him, but I'm sure people will ask for him. But please, it's nice to have a reinforcement. No, I'm sure they'll ask, but I'm just, listen, okay. Well, Vigwe, this is what we call e-begging. I'm e-begging, and I take this from examples of other famous YouTube e-beggars. Now, in my case, I'm not begging for money or donations to support my channel. Maybe I'll do that later, but that's not now. What I'm begging for is that people to take the time, just a few moments, to recognize the discourse, the contributions, the conversation, whether they agree with it or not. It's appreciated. So listen, if you're not a subscriber, but I think most people on the channel right now are subscribers, but if you're not, smash that subscription button right down there and become a subscriber to this channel. That's just Daba Africa Productions, and this is Chris White Africa. What I'd like to do is subscribe to it, and then push the little bell icon so that you get notifications whenever we do a live stream or I do a prepared video coming up in the future. That way you can tune in and watch it, and we'd love to have you with the audience. Also, those comments are appreciated. Positive and negative, I read them all. If I can answer them, I answer them. Ovigwe, if you see any comments on the video later on and they address you, feel free to answer those as well. If anybody's abusive, we just ignore the abusive ones. So if you want to rant or you call people names, go ahead. I'll just delete it. But there are occasionally a few trolls that do that. There's no reason to be abusive. It's just been a legitimate, honest conversation and discourse here. And finally, please smash the like button, because likes matter, not to inflate my ego. It's big enough. I don't need any help. But because the likes drive YouTube promotion of the video. So the more likes you have as a percentage of viewers, the more likely it is that that video will be seen on an impression on somebody's YouTube channel when they go on. So with that, I want to thank our guest, Ovigwe, and I want to thank everybody for tuning in. And I'm going to say we're going to take off here in just a moment. But this, once again, has been an Daba Africa production. This is Chris here in central Pennsylvania with our special guest, Ovigwe, located in Abuja, Nigeria. Don't you just love technology? He's on that side of the world. I'm here in Pennsylvania.
Awesome.
It is awesome, isn't it? We've had this fantastic, I think, very engaging and useful conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, if you like the channel, subscribe. We'll catch you next time here, and look forward to other videos. I have another one that's talking about yesterday's concert with Giselle. Please feel free to go and watch that live concert, which is now no longer live, but it's an hour-long, fantastic concert by Giselle, an up-and-coming Afrikaans singer from South Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your time, your interest. Please tell your friends, your foes, your family, anybody about the channel, and let's see if we can get some more subscribers and people tuning in for the discussion.